Welcome to the Glenn Mercer Show, where we talk all things vegan. If you're not already vegan, no worries, we'll get you there. If you are, tune in for health advice, information on climate change, and all the damage done by our most destructive industry, animal agriculture. We'll also talk cooking, theater, film, and culture. My two reasons for starting this podcast: to entertain, to inform, and to make people vegan. Oh, that's 3. Shit. Hello and welcome to the show. You can find the Glenn Mercer Show across all your favorite podcast platforms and on YouTube and at realmeneatplants.com. My special guest today is the star of stage and screen, environmental activist, author of the new book To the Temple of Tranquility and Step on It, and my old friend, Ed Begley Jr. Ed, welcome to the show.
Good to talk to you, Glenn. I've missed you. You moved out of town and you're sorely missed. And what a great writer you are. To be on, you call me a writer. I'm a wannabe. You're a wonderful, wonderful writer. I've known
Oh,
many.
go on.
All true.
So Ed, I enjoyed so much reading To the Temple of Tranquility and Step on It. It's a memoir. And in that book, I knew you knew a lot of people. I didn't know that you knew Marlon Brando.
How lucky am I to know that incredible actor?
Yeah.
And colorful individual.
Man, Jack Nicholson and all kinds of other people. You didn't know W.C. Fields, did you?
I did not. A great fan, but I never met him. But I met one of the Keystone Cops. So my knowledge and my experience bridged from the silent movies. I knew people who were in the silent movies, knew some of them fairly well, to today when people are making real movies on their cell phone. Actual movies that are out there and do business. A real film. A friend of mine who did that, what was it called? Tangerine or something, and he did a couple of movies. And I'll think of his name in a moment, but a wonderful filmmaker did it on an iPhone. Crazy, huh?
Yeah. Now, some of the book is about a drinking problem that you had.
Oh, yeah.
You were quite an alcoholic for a while, weren't you?
I drank a quart of vodka nearly every day, and I took Quaaludes, which was a drug that was considered an hypnotic drug, kind of a sedative drug. Right. Never supposed to mix it with liquor. I took them together on occasion. Certainly did cocaine, Valium, whatever you got, a handful of pills. I didn't care if it was up or down. I just wanted to get out of here somehow. I'm not sure why. I had a lot of advantages in life, and I'm not sure what I was running away from, but it's much better this way.
Now, from what age to what age did you have this problem?
I started doing things periodically. I would go months and months or a year without doing anything to excess or at all. But I started stealing pills from a medicine chest in my home. My father's pills or my stepmother's pills or sleeping pills, Seconal. I started taking those and I loved the way that made me feel. So I kept taking them and did pot for a while.
At what age?
I think I was about 15 or 16. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I did that for years and smoked pot and got into some dicey situations with that. And then eventually discovered my father's drink of choice, which was vodka. Oh no, he liked Jim Beam more than that, actually. I started drinking hard liquor like my dad, and then I was really in big trouble.
Now, do you think your dad was an alcoholic?
He definitely was. He died sober in a recovery program, in a 12-step program, he had about, at that point, about 20 years sober.
Okay. And for those who may not know, his dad was the great actor Ed Begley.
Great actor, great dad.
Yeah. And when you were going for your driver's license, you had to pick up your birth certificate.
Yep.
And you made kind of a surprising discovery at that time that your parents weren't who you thought your parents were. Tell us about that.
I was sitting in the car waiting for my dad to come out from the business manager's office, and he came with this envelope in his hand, handed it to me. When I finally opened it halfway through the trip, I looked at it, and I, for years, heard people say, "You don't look at all like your dad," and I sometimes thought that myself. I opened it up, and I realized it wasn't my dad that was in question, it was my mother. My mother was not the woman who raised me as my mother. It was a different woman, and she lived to 1998, and I got to know her very well. But usually people discover their dad was someone else, but it's rare when it turns out your mom wasn't your mom. That's a rare occurrence, and I had that special surprise waiting for me.
Yes, and so did your father ever sit you down and say, "Ed, let me talk to you about this"?
When he told me the news, I looked at my birth certificate, and I could show it to you now. I got the strong box behind me, pull it out, but trust me, there's no mother's name on my birth certificate. It's blank. So I thought, what happened? Did they erase it when my mother died? My stepmother, as it turns out, she was my stepmother. She died when I was 7. So it didn't make sense, but I asked, and he went, "No, Amanda wasn't your mother." That's all my dad said, and kept driving. He didn't even pull over. "Hold on, we should probably talk about this for a second. Just give me 60 seconds. No, never mind. I got to get back in traffic." He didn't even do that. He just kept driving silently for a while. He said, finally, "Amanda wasn't your mother. That was my stepmother, the woman he was married to. And Sandy was my mother." When he said that, it was an explosion of feelings, because I love this woman, Sandy. There's something about her. I saw her every Christmas, every Easter. We'd meet at Grand Central Station. She'd give me a gift, a little Easter basket or something. And my sister and I were both crazy about her. And now I know why, because she was in fact our mother. And she left when my sister was about 2 years old. When I was about 1, she went on to do other things. And so I had a memory of her in a more intimate setting than just a family friend at, Grand Central Station. But my sister, I should say, was further along, because she got in the train one day. She got on the Long Island Railroad, rode out to Manhattan from Merrick, New York, out in the island, and she started asking commuters, "Where's Sandy? Where does Sandy live?" Because she thought she lived at Grand Central Station. We saw her there so much. And some cop spotted her, asked her name. She said, "I'm, Bunny Begley." Bunny Begley, like Ed Begley on stage at the Inherit the Wind or whatever the play was he was doing at the time. "Yeah, that's my dad." So she took him. The cop took her to the theater, and my dad took custody of his daughter again. But that was the sort of thing that was awaiting my sister and I, that kind of odd behavior.
Now, since you already knew your mother before you knew she was your mother.
Yeah.
Right. Do you remember the first moment when you said, "So, Sandy, your mom, huh?" When your first mother-son discussion?
I remember it pretty clearly. It was after that driver's license episode, getting the DMV, required document, the birth certificate. Later that day, I believe, after I went and took the test and failed, by the way, I was so nervous, I got knocked out of the possibilities right away. And so I asked to speak to Sandy. My dad set up the phone call, and I talked to her, and I was very excited to have a mother, again.
Yeah.
I had lost my mother, but turned out she was very much alive.
Yeah.
I didn't have the sort of gratitude I think I should have had, but eventually I became quite grateful to have a mother that was still around, of course.
Yeah. So how did that relationship grow once you knew that she was your mother?
I saw her for the first time in person as my mother when I was not yet 17. I was 16 and a half. We went back east to close up this house my dad had sold out in Long Island. And I met her at JFK. I think it was still called Idlewild back then, early 60s. Doesn't matter, but I met her there as my mother, and it was just exciting to see her. I was very smitten with her. So I developed a relationship, and my dad passed in 1970. So I got to know her very well till she passed in 1998.
Okay. Now, here's something I was reminded of reading your memoir, which is that you grew up on both the East Coast and the West Coast. And on the East Coast, you grew up in Merrick on Long Island. I am from Belmore on Long Island, the next town over from Merrick.
That's right, the Belmore Diner. I used to go there and eat.
That's right, the Belmore Diner.
And the Jolly Roger. Do you ever go to that little kiddie amusement park called the Jolly Roger?
I remember that name, but I don't think I ever went there.
You're younger than me, so
yeah,
it might have been gone by the time you were ready for it.
My sister is 6 years older than I am, so she would have been very close to your age. Had you stayed in Merrick, you would have gone to high school with my sister, but you didn't stay in Merrick very long. How old were you when you left Merrick for good?
I was in Merrick kindergarten through 7th grade.
Yeah.
But I was born in Hollywood, California. We used to come back to Hollywood most every summer, so I never lost track of our home in Van Nuys and Hollywood and all that. But finally, we moved back permanently. I went to military school up in Niagara Falls, up in Lewiston, New York, right on the Niagara River. And it was a Roman Catholic military boarding school, the Triple Crown of Repression. So I thought, my dad really wants to kill me. He wants me dead. But it turned out it was wonderful. I loved it. I loved marching around with a wooden gun in the snow, or doing whatever we did. We had a Class A uniform and a Class B uniform we'd wear for different events and occurrences. So if I was supposed to be made miserable, it didn't work. I really enjoyed it. And then I went to high school in the Valley. I went to Chaminade for 1 year out in Canoga Park, then Notre Dame for 2 years, and then I graduated Van Nuys.
Okay. Now, your father would do plays on Broadway, and then he would do movies in Hollywood, and he would drive the whole family back and forth across the country.
In the 50s, that's the way people like my dad he wasn't a movie star, he was a working actor. So he knew that planes existed as a form of transportation, but it was too rich for his blood. So we either took the train or we drove, and we drove many times across country.
And apparently before entering the California deserts, you had to get something called a water bag and put it on the radiator. Is that true?
Yeah, it was a canvas bag with, I think it had a rubber interior as well, a rubber bladder, and you filled that up and you hung it from the radiator because the normal Detroit designed cooling system didn't work within the parameters of the temperatures there, summertime certainly, of Death Valley.
Right.
And so they would have these water, because not only did it give you additional cooling when the water evaporated or nearly all evaporated out of or steamed out of your radiator, you'd put that additional water into the radiator and make it the rest of the way to Barstow, and then you were starting to get into cooler areas, and finally Yucaipa and the Cajon Pass, and you were fine.
Wow. Do you remember what kind of car your father drove in the 50s?
Vividly. It was a Pontiac. I can't remember what year. Big black Pontiac. And I love that car. That's the earliest car of my youth. And then he sold that and got a really nice Chevy. I remember when he bought that, he gave me the little book that picked the different models and colors. He gave me that, one of those things you look at upholstery covers and colors and colors of paint for the exterior and what have you. And I just loved that car. I was too young to drive it, but it was a more comfortable car. I think it might have even had air conditioning. Yeah, I think it did. And the Pontiac certainly didn't have air conditioning, and that got pretty hot sometimes. But he had those cars for a while. Then he had an LTD. Eventually, I got a Mustang. Before I discovered electric cars in 1970, I loved my internal combustion cars, as most kids did.
Yeah. Now, I remember there was sometimes when you would say to me, Glenn, I'm driving tomorrow to Tennessee or something. And it would be like, because you got some gig or something you were doing, and you'd be driving all the way across the country or half the way across the country. And you would mention it offhand to me. And I would think, man, that's a big trip. But I think the reason is you grew up doing that. As a child, you did that.
Exactly. It's kind of in my DNA. It was part of the experience with my father, who was a single parent most of my life. There were some stepmothers that came and went, some of them good, some of them not so good. But that time with him was special, and every kid likes that. So It was often in a car. And that's the other reason is, that's why I like trains so much, because I would take those trips cross country in the train on Amtrak with my dad.
Yeah.
Back then it wasn't called Amtrak, it was called the Super Chief or something.
Yeah. I used to love long train trips too. And so let's get back to the alcoholism. You started experimenting with pills out of the medicine cabinet when you were 15. When did you start drinking vodka?
I started drinking vodka probably in 70, when my dad passed. I kind of went I don't know what was holding me back. He wasn't checking in on me every day at my little apartment. I could have drank hard liquor before that, but I just wasn't interested in it. I drank beer. I liked my beer a bit, and I liked wine a bit, cheap Boone's Farm wine or some, Mogan David wine or whatever. I was not a connoisseur of wine. And then that was just college wine drinking and beer drinking. But then when my dad passed, somehow that was the green light to drink hard liquor. And I don't know why. I'm sitting here right now wondering how that translates into wanting to drink hard liquor. I guess I wanted to be like him, even though I said I didn't want to be like him. I, of course, did. And I wound up in many ways like him. He was an alcoholic. I was an alcoholic. He was a philanderer. I was in my first marriage. A lot of these addictions that he had and weaknesses he had, I swore I'd never be like him, yet I was very much like him in many key ways.
And so that was like when you were 21 or so that your father died, 21?
Yeah, I was 20 when he passed, and soon 21 within about 6 months after that. Then I became 21 and fully legal in every way.
And you did the drinking just continue throughout your 20s and 30s?
Yeah, it escalated pretty quick to the point where I was drinking a quart of vodka every day. I would get up in the morning and make Bloody Marys right away so I wouldn't have a hangover. If I take a Valium in the middle of the night going up to use the bathroom, I just pop a 10 milligram Valium in my mouth, go back to sleep, and wake up going, I have no hangover. This is fantastic. Liquor and Valium, what a great combination that is. Liquor and, Quaaludes. If I thought I was having trouble sleeping, which I did, I always had this fantasy that I had trouble sleeping. I actually don't have trouble sleeping. Back then I certainly didn't, but I would take pills to really get knocked out and sleep deeply. But I did that stuff and operated a vehicle. That's the amazing thing, that I got around LA and didn't kill anybody or kill myself.
But you did get in some accidents.
Big time. I hit cars, parked cars, moving cars, cars with people in them, cars without people in them, and had a big smack up on Christmas Eve in 1975. And the cops let me get in my car and go home. I mean, I still can't believe it. But that was the level, my bullshit. I jumped out of the car screaming right away. I'm so sorry, everybody. This is all my fault. Where's he going with this one? Everybody's wondering, This is all my fault. I've been pumping these brakes since back at Doheny. Here I am at Crescent Heights. The car wouldn't stop. I'm so sorry. Officers, there were 2 cops right next to me when I was doing this, 2 sheriff's department officers in a cruiser right next to me, a few feet away from this whole accident, where I smacked into 2 separate cars. And I just jumped out. I said, guys, do me one favor, one only. It's Christmas Eve. Here's my favor, and I'm shutting up. Arrest me and take me in. Calm down. What's your name? Can you have some ID? Can we have some ID, please? You've been drinking? Of course I've been drinking. It's Christmas Eve. I had a couple of eggnog. Write it up whenever way you want. I'm on drugs and alcohol. But I'm praying that you arrest me and take me in. It'll help my lawsuit with Toyota. I've been pumping these brakes since back at Doheny. It's a defective car. It will help my lawsuit if you take me in. Thank you, guys. I had them under the car with me, Glenn, looking for a leak in the brake line. There's no leak in the brake line. The problem with the brakes is I hadn't touched them. That's the problem with the brake system. I had not activated them. Just careened into these cars. Yeah. And one of the guys I hit, I talked him into getting in the car with me. He gets in the car with me. I decide I'm going to drive him home because I've destroyed his car. It's towed away. And we start to drive away from the scene. And I hear this sound, bung, 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 this metallic sound. I said, my car never made that noise. Do you know what it is? My friend Neil in the back seat goes, yeah, you're knocking the mirrors off the parked cars on Sunset with your big Jeep mirror. Oh, okay. Wow. He says, just a little bit to the left. I was so unaware of what I was doing behind the wheel still. And this guy that I was going to give a ride just started hitting me and saying, let me out of this car, you friggin' maniac. And he would be correct.
Yeah. I'm laughing, but it really could have been very serious.
I could have killed a family of people in the car. The way I rear-ended this one guy, it could have. If it was a Pinot, it would have been a very different story, this whole story.
Yeah. So, listeners, do not do what Ed did. Please.
Please do not. Doesn't work.
Now, you also, in addition to having those interactions with officers, you also used to wear the uniform of an officer in doing stand-up on stage at the Troubadour, and you got arrested for impersonating an officer when you were crossing the street in that uniform. Tell us that story.
A lot of my friends at that point, the slow part of my career, said Ed Begley can't get arrested. Well, I proved them wrong. I was walking between the Troubadour and Tana's Italian restaurant, 2 doors to the east of the great nightclub of the Troubadour, where Linda Ronstadt, the Eagles, Elton John, Bette Midler, Van Morrison, Richard Pryor, comics, performers with big bands and small bands, solo acts, played there, and you sat 20 feet, 30 feet away from acts that big for a $2 cover charge. So, and a 2-drink minimum. That's how he made additional money, Doug Weston. But I was there. I claimed because I was going to go on stage. That was all bullshit. The story I told so much, I almost believed it myself. I'd been at a club in the Valley performing a set for a friend for free, had my police uniform on, went to the Troubadour to have some laughs with that, wearing that into the Troubadour bar, full LAPD uniform. And I was walking next door to Tana's to go grab a bite with a couple of ladies. And the sheriff's department guy, the sheriffs again, I'm always running into it with LA sheriffs. They came running up saying, are you in pursuit? Are you in pursuit? I didn't know what they were talking about. And of course, that's a logical question because I'm in what was then LA County. It was not West Hollywood back then. It was considered LA County. So the sheriff's department of LA County maintained peace and order, not LAPD. So if there's an LAPD person at the Troubadour, what's he doing there? It's are you in pursuit? That's the only reason you would be there. And so they arrested me and took me in for impersonating an officer, and I went to county jail, which is a very serious place to be for the weekend.
And did you have any companions in the jail cell?
I did. There was a guy who was the alpha male. I can't remember his real name. Let's call him Alfie. This guy somehow found my whole thing amusing. I told him about what had happened, how I wound up there. And I, had a bunch of other things about diet and what have you that I told him about getting vegetarian food there. He thought I was hysterically funny. So I entertained him for the whole weekend. It was the smartest, best set I've ever done because it kept everybody's mind off other things. And it was, your time in LA County or Atascadero or wherever you're incarcerated is you want to find some way to pass the time. And I provided an outlet for everybody, get the people laughing that were in the cell with me.
So were you there? Were in jail for 48 hours?
I was there. This all happened. I got arrested on a Friday night. So I got taken to the San Vicente tank where drunks would be made to sleep it off. And then sober the next morning were allowed on their own recognizance to go home and have a court date for drinking, driving, or whatever they did. So I was there, but impersonating officer was a very serious crime as it is today. Mm-hmm. But back then, this is 1973, this happened. There was no ATMs back then, Glenn. And certainly not one you could get $500, unheard of. And so I didn't know anybody that had $500 at that point. So I had to spend the weekend in jail. So they took me to county, put me in a cell that was to sleep 4 guys, 4 cots. There were 5 of us. One guy, definitely lowest on the totem pole, he was forced to sleep on the floor, but he was out of it, so he didn't seem to mind. But this guy, Alfie, was just great. He kept the cell clean. I helped him clean up the floors and what have you. helped count out his sit-ups and what have you, and his chin-ups he was doing on the bed and all that stuff, and kept him amused with my banter. And he said, if anybody bothers you, let me know. I will take care of it. And he was a very large, very funny, wonderful African-American gentleman. He kept me out of danger while I was in county. I'm very grateful. So when I left, I went to Beverly Hills in a bus to go have my arraignment, and they, of course, dismissed it. What do you mean? He's an actor? Why did you arrest him for impersonating an officer? They said their part, so I got out on an OR, my own recognizance, but they had to take me back to county jail. So everything I had, a few dollars, some change, a handkerchief, dental floss, whatever I had in my pockets, I can't remember. I gave it all to Alfie because everything is very precious in jail. You don't have a lot of stuff.
Right.
So he was very grateful.
Well, if you run into him again, give him a copy of your book.
I think I will.
Yeah. So that it's always a mistake to wear your costume on the street, Ed. That's always a mistake.
Very bad. Yeah. You're breaking the fourth wall. It's out of character. Everything about it's wrong.
Yeah. Especially bad if you're playing a clown.
Exactly.
I remember being in a restaurant in North Beach in San Francisco, and there was it was a pizza place, and there was a guy dressed in a clown costume, and he was just there eating a pizza with his with a woman, and I was with a very funny comedian, Daryl Henriquez.
Oh, I love Daryl.
Do you know Daryl?
Very well.
Okay, well, Daryl looks at the clown, looks at me, and says, Glenn, I'm sorry, but I have to do this. And he gets up, and he goes over to the table with the clown and the woman, and he starts screaming at the woman. He says, I bought you a Jaguar. I bought you a home in Marin, and you leave me for this clown.
I love Daryl. That's so funny. I never knew that story. That's a great story.
Yeah. So let's take a quick break now, a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
All right, if you've ever wanted to show off your plant-based lifestyle and do it in style, here's your chance. We have some of the most amazing t-shirts, hats, accessories, coffee mugs, and more at shop.realmeneatplants.com. We have statement t-shirts that will bring a smile to everyone's face. I love the I want tofu tonight tee. Plus, we have podcast tees, Real Women Eat Plants gear, Real Kids Eat Plants, and Real People Eat Plants, just in case men, women, and kids didn't cover it all. Yeah, we love you and love that you want to show off that healthy lifestyle of yours. Again, check out our high-quality gear at shop.realmeneatplants.com and enjoy.
All right, welcome back. We're talking with star of stage and screen, Ed Begley Jr. And Ed, you were one of the stars of a famous medical show because of an ongoing strike. Now, we're not going to name that show, but I'll bet that most of our listeners will be able to figure this one out. And so during those years, when you were one of the stars of that great show, were you drinking during those years?
I was sober by then. I got that job in 1982.
Okay.
But the great thing about that experience for me was it's been my good fortune my whole life, Glenn. You know, what I want is A, and I wind up with B, and B is always better than A somehow in my life. What I wanted and auditioned for was a part of Dr. Peter White. It was a regular, it was not yet cast. Other people were cast. David Burney was cast. Denzel Washington was cast. David Morris was cast. Lots of wonderful actors and actresses were cast. But this part of Dr. Peter White was uncast, went and read for it, did very well, felt very good about it. Got a call from the agent, you didn't get it. Who did get it? I figured maybe it was, or Jeff Goldblum was up for a part, they're considering him. No, not Jeff Goldblum. Terrence Knox got it. Who's Terrence Knox? I said. I never heard of him. I never minded losing a part as I have to my friend Jeff, my friend Michael McKean, my dear friend Charles Grodin, my dear friend Martin Short, John Cleese, all of them friends. When I lose a part to them, my reaction is, I'm on a list with John Cleese? I can't believe I'm on the same list. Who screwed that list up? But in this case, a guy I'd never heard of. So I felt very bad. Then they called back and they said, we really liked Ed's reading, so we're going to offer him another part, the part of Ehrlich. How many lines did it have? I looked at the script. It had like 2 lines. And there's a third line with a character named Stanton, another character. They're going to meld the 2 together. So I had a total of 3 lines. The problem was Stanton was talking to Ehrlich, so I'd be talking to myself if I had as many as 3 lines. And short lines, too. I went, I'm going to do it. Maybe something will come of it. Of course it did. Me and Bill Daniels, they loved the mutton chef of it, with shorter Bill Daniels and tall, goofy Ed Begley as these 2 different, our 2 different characters, him berating me in nearly every show. And the part of Dr. Peter White, he turned out to be the hospital rapist in the show. He was shot by Ellen Bree's character in the stomach and then in the balls. And he was dead and gone. So that's what I would have gotten if I'd gotten my way. The universe had other plans for me. It's been that way my whole crazy lucky life, Glenn.
Right. Now, you remember meeting me when I was one of the writers on the show Parenthood.
Yes.
But what you don't know, I don't think, is actually the first time I wrote for you. I didn't meet you then, but was on the show that I cannot name now, because on that medical show, because I got hired as a freelancer. It was my first gig in Hollywood, was to write an episode of that unnamed medical show. And if there's anyone in the audience who can't figure out the name of that show, do not play trivia, because we've given you enough clues.
I'd forgotten that, Glenn. That's so great. They're lucky to have
I got
you.
hired as a freelancer, and it was an education for me. What happened was I had written a play called Amorphous George. It was a comedy. And right before I moved to LA, I get a call from a Studio Arena Theater in Buffalo that they want to do a reading of the play. So I said, great, do the reading of the play. And they said, no, you have to come here. I have to come there to Buffalo for a day for the reading? No, you have to come for a week. I have to come for a week for you to have a reading of the play? Yep. So, they abuse playwrights in this country. I had no choice. I went to Buffalo for a week for them to do a reading of the play, and it turned out they weren't even using professional actors. They were using local, the worst actors I've ever seen, very bad amateur actors who were ruining my play with every word. So I had this week of torture in Buffalo. But everyone I met in Buffalo, when they asked me what I was doing with my life, I was saying, well, I'm about to move to LA to see if I could break in. Everybody said, call Tom Fontana. Everybody. I took a bus from Buffalo to Toronto to visit a friend. And on the bus, I'm sitting next to a woman, and she says, what do you do? I said, well, I'm about to move to LA. She says, call Tom Fontana. Everybody. So I had just moved to LA, and I didn't know who this guy Tom Fontana was. I figured he should have been mayor of Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I call up, and I get office of the medical show, to be named later. And I didn't know he worked there. And I said, okay, well, tell him Glenn called. Everyone in Buffalo said I should call him. And I figured I'd never hear from him. But he called me back on a Sunday afternoon, talked to me for an hour, and hired me for an episode. So that guy was
so great. I love that guy.
That guy was a blessing.
He is that. I just sent him the book, and he loved the book, and he was so kind and generous to me at every turn doing that show, the 6 years that we did the show. Wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yeah. I met him once years later. But I didn't meet him when I came in. I worked with John Tinker and Channing Gibson, who were very nice guys.
They sure are, and talented writers, both of them.
Yeah. And so I wrote the episode, and they were happy with the episode. And then I go to watch the episode. Like, they had asked me to write a love story between a nurse and a doctor and a couple other things. And then I watched the episode that has my name on it. And it's about a guy who has a heart transplant from a sheep. And I call up John Tinker and I said, you didn't tell me to write a heart transplant from a sheep. I could write that. I can write sheep. Why didn't you tell me to write that? He said, well, we changed the whole arc of the season and we were happy with your script, but we decided to go with a different story. So that's what happens to freelance writers. You write an episode, but then the guys in the room decide they want to do a whole different thing. And
wow,
it was a good experience, a little bit of a shock to see that there were sheep involved in my episode.
Well, you're a great writer. They would have been lucky to have your script, the final cut.
So by the time you were doing St. Elsewhere, you were sober from that point forward.
I was, and my life just got better and better. I got better jobs. I got better in relationships. I got married again a second time, and I met a wonderful woman in the early 90s, around when we started to get to know each other.
Right.
And we're still together. We have a wonderful daughter who's 23 years old. And, life can be very good if you get out of some of those addictive and abusive patterns. And I was able to do that, thank God. But I couldn't do it alone. There's support groups out there to help people. And I wisely sought out one or more of them. And here I am today, all the better for it.
Yeah. And would you say that today, if an actor was trying to break in and he had the drinking and drug problems that you had, that it wouldn't happen, it would be less likely to happen today, that it would be more frowned upon? Or do you think it's happening today still?
It's happening today still, but there's no hiding anymore from social media and TMZ and all of that. I wouldn't have ever gotten to the point where I could get sober and get a medical show like I did, or any of the other series I've had. I just wouldn't have made it. There would have been images of me doing what I was doing on social media that would have been hard to come back from. So if I was coming of age now, I'd, be Ed Nobody. It wouldn't have happened for me, I can promise you. I'm very lucky. I dodged a bullet.
How has the business changed, would you say, from the time when you were breaking into now?
It's changed so much in so many different ways. In some big ways, like, the studios weren't prepared for the shift that was happening that became apparent, with Easy Rider and those kinds of movies. Society was shifting. And so they couldn't quite keep up with it. And the equipment was changing. It was, it was this elephantine equipment to do a color movie. You needed a camera the size of this desk. Because in the old days, Gone with the Wind, there was no color film. You had 3 strips of film going through the camera. I don't know if you knew that. It was a prism that separated blue, green, and red for the negative, and you'd have your yellow, magenta, and cyan that would come from printing it. And so they would print it like a magazine. Then it became color film they had in 1949 finally. But a lot of the shows were black and white when I was growing up. Gunsmoke and Perry Mason and Wagon Train, all those big shows. And it just really started to change in a big way. The kinds of movies they were making, French filmmakers had a big influence on people in the West. And people like Martin Scorsese came along and did different kinds of movies like Mean Street and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And it all changed. And, fortunately, the studios finally began to shift and catch up. But for a while, they were left out. People like BBS were doing those movies, Bert Schneider and those guys that had BBS Productions.
So the equipment now to make film, even to make television, is a lot smaller and easier to manage, right, Ed?
It is. There's a guy that made a film, a good film, by the way, on an iPhone, But certainly for all the different TV shows and movies, it got smaller. They started using the Panaflex for a while. And now the digital cameras, it's no longer celluloid, except in a few instances, with Quentin Tarantino and a few others. use celluloid, like Eastman color or some other kind of color film. But it's all digital now, of course, and the lighting has changed. You used to need these big 10Ks and 5K lights, and so to get an f4, a normal setting on a lens for focus, an f4, you needed to have 400 foot candles of light. That's the amount of light. Let me try to like that. I'll turn it back off, but you get the idea. Yeah. And everybody was sweating. You're all schwitzing like a chazer to be in front of those lights. You're constantly changing shirts and stuff. It was very hot in the set because of those lights. So it all got better. You can have a wonderful scene, as the great cameraman Gordon Willis demonstrated, with just one light bulb or one candle. You can light a whole scene with that. That's back when it was still celluloid. The celluloid film was fast enough to do that. Now with digital cameras, you can do it with, tiny little LED light.
Right. Now, back in the day, an indie film like Sex, Lies, and Videotape would come out, and people would go to the theaters and discover this new filmmaker and these new young actors, and it would become a kind of sensation. Do you think that with the move to streaming now, that's harder to make happen?
It probably is. At first I thought this is going to be great. It's just another market for people to exhibit their creativity, to show their art. And that's probably true, but people still crave, I know I crave the group experience of a movie, to sit in a theater, as I did quite recently, to see, the Barbie movie and to see right. Oppenheimer and those films. It's great to experience them with a group. And, that's going to be more and more of a rare experience, I'm afraid. I like to stay home too, and I enjoy watching some movies at home. But if you watch, Lawrence of Arabia on your phone, are you really watching Lawrence of Arabia?
Right. Or a comedy. I know Woody Allen is not particularly enthusiastic about trying to make comedies for people to watch in their living room.
Right. Something you want to experience in a group, Stand-ups don't go by to your home and do it for a family of 4. They want a nice room full of people. That's the way to experience it.
Right. Now, Ed, when did you go vegetarian and when did you go vegan? What's the story behind that?
I became a vegetarian back in 1970 with the first Earth Day. I stopped eating veal. I became a vegetarian back with the first Earth Day in 1970. I stopped eating meat, veal, lamb, pork, beef, anything like that. Stopped that. And then for a while, I ate some fish, and I went back and forth with that over time. Different doctors advising me one way or the other. But I've got to talk to you about some medical help. And, I was a Megan for a while, a Megan being a mostly vegan. But, I've been a vegan since 92, with a few minor slips.
That's about when I went vegan, 92.
Yeah. And a few slips that never included beef, of course, or chicken or anything like that. No animals in cages. I just would never go back to that ever, ever, ever. But I feel pretty good for a guy my age and have had some health challenges. I'm doing very, very good.
Yeah, your book, To the Temple of Tranquility and Step on It, your book ends with your current health challenges, and I can see that you're doing very well.
Yep, I'm 73 now, almost 74. I've had a certain neurological condition since 2004, probably prior to that, but I've definitely had it since then, diagnosed in 2016, and I'm doing very, very good. Every time I see the neurologist, he says, if I'm grading on the bell curve, you're still the head of the class. And it's because of everything, the healthy way I'm eating, and NAD and glutathione and hyperbaric chamber and all that stuff. In addition to his AMA medicine, carbidopa, levodopa stuff, which works too. I do other more holistic stuff, which only complements it and make me rise to the head of the class.
I'm a firm believer in the power of diet. And I think that it's quite possibly the diet that's doing you as much good as any of the meds.
I think so too.
And in any case, it can hurt to eat healthy vegan food, more fruits, more vegetables all the time.
Definitely. It's when I do that, I feel good. And, having tried other things over the years, I just feel good when I'm eating right. And exercise is key too. I go to the gym every day, and that helps a lot too.
Yeah. In this recent pandemic, COVID, there was a study in the BMJ journal, used to be called the British Medical Journal, that people on a plant-based diet got 72% less severe COVID. 72%. Now, I don't know how they define plant-based diet. It didn't necessarily mean a whole foods, low-fat vegan diet. It might have just been people eating a little more plants. I don't know how they defined it, but 72% less. Could you imagine if there was a pill that you took that reduced your chances of severe COVID by 72%? And the only side effects is it also reduces your chance of heart disease and diabetes and obesity and everything else. And yet, none of the government's COVID spokespeople, you know who I'm talking about, none of them ever mentioned eat a plant-based diet.
I'll support that theory because the second time I had it, which is about 6 months ago now or something like that, maybe 9 months, doesn't matter. It was so mild it felt like a medium-sized cold. Sorry, Bunny, I'll be done in a second. The second time I had COVID, it felt like a medium level cold. The first time I had it, I was sick. I had a very sore throat. I was sick for about an hour. 1 hour. I took the medicines my doctor prescribed and it went away. But the reason I think it went away so quickly was that, I eat right all the time and get plenty of exercise. Eat right being plant-based diet. So I will support that theory, Glenn.
Yeah. Well, Ed, it's great seeing you. It's great talking with you. I highly recommend the book To the Temple of Tranquility and step on it. It's a wonderful memoir and very, very funny. And I wish you all the success with it. Now, it's not yet out, right? People can pre-order. Is that right?
You can pre-order right now, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, places like that. And it was great fun to write. I love the process of it. But it comes out October 3rd. And I'm just so grateful to spend this time with you, Glenn. You're a great writer. And for you to have me on your show about writing, I feel quite successful today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ed, for those kind words. And let's have you back in a few months, okay? We'll talk about
Bunny?
What I'm sure will be your bestseller.
If Bunny keeps quiet, can I bring her too?
If who keeps quiet?
Let me bring my friend Bunny. 1 second.
Bunny?
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bunny is coming. Okay.
This is my Bunny.
That's a good
tow yard. My daughter found her a year ago on my birthday, Glenn, at a tow yard, and she clearly fell for my daughter because she saved her from the tow yard. She was black with soot, what have you, and malnourished.
Oh my goodness!
She came in the house, dropped my daughter like a bad habit, came to me. I don't know why, Glenn. Maybe I look like someone from her past human friend life, but she just hasn't left my side now for the past year.
Oh my goodness. That's a nice dog.
She's a great dog. I love her. And I love you, Glenn. It's so great to spend this time with you.
Great to see you, Ed. Thank you. And please, everyone, please subscribe. We're trying to get to 2 million subscribers, and we're a little bit short. Ed, have you subscribed to my show?
I'm going to when we're done here.
Please do, because I'm trying to get to 2 million subscribers, and I have a plan. I'm going to have 2 million guests, and I'm going to ask them each to subscribe. And then that'll get me there.
That'll do it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. This has been the Glenn Mercer Show, where everyone listening turns vegan, regains their health, and annoys their friends and relatives. Find us on YouTube at The Glenn Mercer Show and across all your major podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe.